Gentlemen, welcome to another episode of Rennch. On today's show, we are going to be working on my turbo oil scavenge tanks, foreshadowing, and you get to watch me attempt to weld aluminum and then make fun of me in the comments. What could be better? For a refresher for the new folks, behind me is a 1969 Porsche 911S. It was a race car. I've converted it back into a street car, and I've put a Subaru EZ30r flat 6 into the engine compartment. I know, it's blasphemy. That's why it's called the blasphemy build. Now, the turbo configuration on this car is reminiscent of the Porsche 935, one of the most venerable, celebrated Porsche race cars in history. So I'm doing my best to duplicate and emulate the tech and engineering of that car, including the lovely twin turbo setup in the back. Now, because of the configuration of the low turbos, one of the major issues you have is draining the oil from the turbos and getting it into the oil pan. You hope for a gravity drain, but I only had like this much space from the bottom of the turbo to the oil pan. So last episode, I've asked you guys, what should I do with an oil scavenge system? And the two choices were kind of an aluminum box in between the two turbos that would drain into an oil pump and then eventually into the pan, or individual tanks that would mount under the turbos, connect somewhere in the middle, go to the pump, and then drain somewhere in the engine as well. Now, being here in Southern California, I'm very fortunate to have access to some very smart, very capable Porsche people. In this case, busy as Roy, busy Roha. We'll call him Busy Moto. Busy is one of the most amazing engineers you've ever seen working on a car, and it just so happens that he's the nicest man you've ever met. He is so sweet. He had an Instagram post, this one right here, and I said, oh my God, he's got the exact same turbo configuration I'm looking for. I wonder if I could ask him a couple questions about it. So I pinged him on Instagram and said, hey man, I would love to ask you a couple questions about your turbo setup. He called me right away and said, how can I be of service? Because that's who he is. Because of the conversation I had with him, I got a lot of clarity around what I want to do here with the turbos and how to configure and engineer this entire system. As you can see here, he's got the twin turbos, and then each one of the turbos has a scavenge tank on the bottom. Those scavenge tanks eventually get connected and go to a pump. Then that pump dumps somewhere into the engine. In his case, he's drained it in like 9 different places on the engine. The Subaru engine is very similar to a Metzger engine, so there's a lot of different spots where we can drain the oil. One of the things I didn't consider is that the wastegates need to occupy the space where the square tank would have been, thus necessitating the need for these individual tanks under the turbos. Let me take you to the workbench right now, and I'll show you all the stuff I ordered and what the plan is for the day. Now, after I talked to Busy, I had a bit of an Amazon shopping spree. Part of it is me continuing to try to dial in my TIG welding setup. I just keep learning more things from YouTube and trying to get the configuration right. One of the things I did is got this ceramic cup for my welder, and hopefully this enables me to have a little bit more spread on the gas, hopefully some cleaner welds, although I tend to be a little better with aluminum right now for some reason than I am with steel. So we'll see how today goes. The one downside of today's episode is that I may run out of argon gas. It's Saturday, I can't get a refresh until Monday, so it is possible that I just get the tanks tacked today, and then I have to finish them off on Monday, which is fine because I have more parts coming in between now and then. The other thing I grabbed on Amazon was this tungsten sharpener. And it's really important that your tungstens, which are obviously used in TIG welding, not only are sharp, but they're sharpened to a very specific angle. So what this thing does is it doesn't allow you for any room. You have a 3/32 tungsten, you throw it in here and you spin it around, and there's a grinding wheel on the inside, and then it just gives you the exact grind you want. It was like 23 bucks, and some of the other ones were 150 bucks. So I got a bunch of new tungstens and ground them, and I found it to be really, really easy to use. So hopefully it helps and my welds are a little more consistent. Next, I grabbed these. I found like pretty much everything I could for like tube welding and things like that on Amazon. These are specific clamps that are for tubes. You can see that this thing's there. I guess you can probably loosen this thing up to whatever size you need. And what I think is cool about this is you could put two pieces of tubing together and clamp it and then keep it exactly there as you put your tacks in, which hopefully will be super helpful. I grabbed a couple of boxes of tungstens. I got another 2% serrated. These are the gray ones, both of them. 3/32 and then 0.040. I think the 040 is really good for stainless steel welding, which I haven't tried yet, but that is on the docket. So this is a pile of -16 aluminum fittings, and I'm going to use them to modify these CSF oil coolers so we can use them as radiators until the actual proper ones are finished, which could be a couple of months. So I have a Subaru swap kit for Porsche 911s and 912s, and these are actually Porsche oil coolers, which I'm going to convert to radiators by using these -16 aluminum fittings. I'm going to modify these things so that we can actually use them as radiators until the proper radiators are finished, which might be a couple of months, but I don't want to wait that long to get these cars fired up. By the way, I still have one more beta spot available. If you have a vintage 911 or 912, you don't have an engine, or you want to build a race car or something, I have a bolt-in plug-and-play Subaru EZ30r swap. So just DM me, find me in the comments, let me know how to reach you. You can find me on Instagram right here. So if you are interested, I have one more spot available at a huge discount, and you get free upgrades for the life of your engine. One of the major things that I learned from Busy is that I don't actually need to run coolant through my turbos. So I don't need all of this hosage, which is so exciting. I was not very happy to have everything look so hosey under there. So thankfully I don't have to use them. I just have to feed oil at the top, drain it out of the bottom, and that's cool. But I also have to put these bad boys there. Y'all haven't seen these yet, but these are the lovely red anodized Garrett wastegates that will go somewhere under the turbos. So I'll have the two big pipes and then probably these two small pipes. These I actually do have to feed with a little bit of oil and water, I believe. But I mean, how rad are these? How cool is this? So these are gonna have to be integrated somewhere. I gotta figure out how to do that. But we're learning every day here on the channel. Finally, the creme de la creme, as they say in the creme business. This is an oil scavenge pump that I got from Amazon. I've ordered a couple of NPT to -10 fittings. So these things will basically drain from the turbos into the tank, through the tank, drain out, and then go into the car somewhere. And I'm not exactly sure, although I'm leaning towards valve cover on the, what would be the passenger side at the moment. Finally, we get to the tanks. After again talking with Busy, he told me what I needed to do. I happen to have some 1.5-inch aluminum tubing sitting around. So I cut a couple of 4-inch chunks, and I have prepared these, cleaned them with the 3M scrubby, beveled the edges. And what I need to do now is basically cut the blanks that'll go on top. And I can do that with my hole saw. So we're actually going to start this video by cutting some stuff with the hole saw and see if I can get 4 nice caps for the end of these bad boys. Look at that, it's like I have a machine shop. Boom, perfect little blank. Let's go. Pretty toasted tungsten, so I'm gonna get another one. So you've just seen me clean and prep the material. I've also wiped down the aluminum rod I'm going to use. The challenge here is I have a smidgen of gas left, and this larger cup actually uses a little more gas. So my hope is that I can get I'm gonna hope for 16 tacks. I will settle for 8, meaning I can like tack each one of these at least in 2 spots, top and bottom, just to have a general idea of kind of how big they're gonna be, and I don't know, blah, blah, blah. But that's the hope. Can I get 8 successful tacks out of this before running out of gas? And, you know, I sure hope so. It's also quite possible that I'm already out of gas and this will be a train wreck. But let's hope not. Complete and utter tungsten fry out of the gates. I did so well when you guys weren't watching. Damn it. 2 for 2. You know, offline I welded one of these things up and it was fine. Like, it looked great. I'm 0 for 2 on even getting this thing started. It was so nice. I had such a couple of nice welds before. Just a little drip, had a nice tack. It was so easy. Not right now. That one was decent. 3 out of 4. I'm gonna have to redo this whole one. I just ruined this whole piece. It's so irritating. Damn it. Alright, something's wrong. Something's wrong with my setup because this is just not working. None of this is working. Pardon my outburst, but after a long think, I've decided to bring in some professional talent. You guys may remember Chris from many, many episodes ago.
Years.
When we broke the Subaru engine down, and he was the guy that had such expertise in them. But the thing about Chris is he is a master fabricator. He can literally make anything. You said you have...
Lathe, mill, welding tables, welds. I've done trailers and cars and off-road stuff for the last 25 years.
So if you guys have any projects you want to send to Chris, it's Cruz Infinity Fab. C-R-U-Z Infinity. Is that with an I?
Yep. Yes. No, Y.
With a Y. Fab on Instagram. Reach out to him. He can pretty much do anything you can possibly imagine. Today he's going to show me some tips on aluminum welding, because it is obviously the bane of my existence, this TIG welder. But I've actually never had any proper training with aluminum. So
right.
It's tricky. And
aluminum's super finicky. It's not the easiest thing to get a hold of. It's like jumping in and trying to weld titanium or hastelloy in the beginning.
Right.
It's just not, it's not happy.
So he's going to be working on a few projects for me with my Subaru engine swap. He's going to actually do some work on the oil coolers and kind of turn them into radiators while we wait for the prototypes to be done. Today, though, we're going to try to reclaim my pigeon poop welds from running out of gas. And we've got a bit of a plan. We're going to tack these together.
Correct.
And grind them down so they're purty again, and then try to weld them up the way they were supposed to be in the first place.
Correct.
So Chris, it feels like half the battle with TIG welding is getting the setup right.
Correct.
Just like really getting the machine dialed. And even as we've experienced here today, there's 80 different opinions on how to set something
there
up.
Are, and it's all, a lot of it's personal preference, and a lot of it's what your machine calls out for. Different machines, different years, different types call for different material for welding, as far as an electrode, and as far as how your machine's set up.
Yeah.
And that makes a huge difference with your overall production and quality.
Okay, so he's made a bunch of tweaks to my machine. Very different than I had the last time you saw me trying to weld a minute ago. He's going to dial it in with this test piece, and then we're going to get to it.
Yeah, it's not liking that.
All right, Chris just tacked those, so now they're solid, ready to grind. He's got one more end to do. And then these are the test beads. They look almost as good as mine, but whatever. All right, so got these things all ground down and ready to actually be welded, better than I tried. But I did dial in a few welds. Chris got the welder dialed in really well, so these actually look halfway decent. And of course, everything's easy when you're on a flat surface and you don't have to go around corners and you're angle stays exactly the same, etc., etc. So this is the hard part. This is actually a somewhat difficult because it's a relatively small tube as well. Bigger the tube, the easier it is to weld. And yeah, no wonder I had problems with it. So do you start by going on top of the spot weld first, and then you go to the second one, or how do you prefer?
Yeah, so the easiest way for me, and everybody has their own take on this, I start in the center, not on the back side, because if you start on the back side, since this side's tacked, this side will actually pop up. So you start just this side of the tack here,
Okay.
and then you pull your weld back into the tack and then come forward.
Okay.
And with TIG welding, generally speaking, you always pull the weld towards you.
And with a diameter this small, will you have to make it 2 trips?
Yeah.
Will you go like a quarter at a time, basically?
Like I said, TIG welding is all about personal preference and comfort.
Yeah.
If you think you can make it the whole way, you can do the whole thing. If you did it vertically, I know guys that can go around the whole thing without even moving.
Really? They just kind of go like
Yeah,
that?
and then also there's a thing called a weld positioner that's a turntable, basically like a lathe chuck, and you set a speed, and then you can it actually turns, and you're stationary, and the part turns for you.
Right. It's super cool. It's like a record player.
Right.
Yeah, it's very cool. I've seen that. So what do you prefer for something like this? Do you prefer it standing up or lying down?
Me personally, I like standing them up. People like setting them down, but the people that do it sitting down generally only do a quarter at a time.
Okay. Are you pulsing with your foot there?
Yeah.
Okay.
And your machine has pulse on it.
It does, yeah.
So you could turn on the pulse, but that's just one more variable that
Sure.
you know you have to get used to. And if your hand isn't on time with the pulse, then your weld comes out super wavy.
Okay.
Nothing wrong with it, but
Yeah.
it's just another learning curve. That's all. You can try doing it standing up, or you can try doing it laying down. It really doesn't make a difference.
Welding with a friend.
Hi, I mean, I've taught many. No gloves?
I will. I'm just sizing it. I'm just
trying to decide how you
I'm
want
just
to
figuring
go.
out how I want to go here.
It's all.
How did you have your hand position?
Okay, so this hand, like, okay, if you look, I moved your torque because so look, see, it's kicked off to the right, and it's forward and bent up. But see, when I weld backwards like this, and my wire is actually under my arm. So you can do that.
Put it like that?
Yeah, and I use like chopsticks. Yep, like that.
Yeah.
So, like I said, it's all personal preference.
Yeah, that's cool.
And I only use maybe 2 or 3 inches of stick out because on small wire like this, it has a tendency to flex.
Right. But how were you on this? Or how were you?
So yeah, I was actually on this,
Yeah.
and my wire is usually about here.
Yeah, okay.
And then as soon as you start to see a puddle, your flow start to dab.
The old dry run. Were you going about a quarter of the way, you think?
Once you get the puddle, you'll see, because it'll start to flow and it'll run, and you just don't want it to run too far or nip that top corner.
A little bit of boost right there. Yeah.
You're getting a little hot. You need to feather out a little bit sooner.
Okay. Stop. A little better.
You're boiling your acetone. You're gonna catch on fire.
Is it really?
Yeah. Yeah, it's all over the table.
Oh shit.
So when it's because it gets hot, and since acetone's flammable, it expands. So what I do is you drill a small pinhole right here on the top, or on the top of the bottle, and you just cover it with your finger when you squirt it, and then you have a vent hole. You never have to worry about it.
Understood.
But you're actually sitting in the acetone right now.
Yeah.
So you might want to give it a minute
To do its thing.
evaporate. Yeah.
That's funny.
I smelled it.
Yeah, yeah.
It's just too many years of doing it, you know. No, you started out really clean.
Yeah.
It just you're carrying the heat that's already in it.
Yeah.
So you're just getting a little
Getting a little bit.
toasty.
Yeah.
And another thing, when it starts to carry too much like that, and it gets hot, if you have compressed air,
Yeah.
Just hit it with the air blower.
Okay.
Hit it with the air blower. If you could hold it with a pair of channel locks or something, hit the outside, hit the inside, because then you're pulling all the heat out of the inside, and it's not getting held inside by the table.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely mine has more heat in it, I can tell.
Yeah.
All right, that might be more of a horizontal than a vertical. That felt a little easier to me.
And like I said, everything's personal preference.
Here are the two. Obviously, this is the one that Chris did. This is the one that I did. You can see I've got a lot more undercut and heat happening on my side. He kept his very consistent around the outside, and mine obviously is kind of all over the place, but it's okay. It's what it's for. I did find that lying down horizontally was a little better for me, so I'm going to probably give that a go for next time. But I don't hate it. It's okay. It's certainly better than how we started this video, that's for sure. It was good until the very end when
Yep. Was that the tungsten, or was that
I'm not
where it
sure.
started to blow out, got too
I
hot?
only had like a quarter inch to go.
Sometimes that's all that matters, because all that heat is building up inside, and it'll start to just try and blow out a little.
All right, so we can let this thing cool,
Yep.
clean it up, and
Yep,
hit it with
exactly.
that. Up until here,
Yep.
that was pretty good.
Yeah, and you're real
Really
consistent.
undercut anyway.
Right here is a little undercut, but that's not.
Right here, right there.
Yeah, right there.
Yeah. See how quickly it was
Right.
absorbing,
Right.
and I really backed off.
Yep. And like I said, that's why you always carry more heat, because in the
Yeah.
opposite instance, you can't get a dab in there fast enough, and you don't have enough heat, and you gotta fucking blast it.
Yeah.
And if you're short on heat, then, we're only running your 200 amp machine at 125.
Right.
So,
What's so funny about this is I'm like, oh, it's 8th inch, I got
Yeah.
this. I was like, I was there, I'm there,
Yeah.
and then bam. So how are you scoping out new work these days?
word of mouth mostly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I hope we can get you something from this vid. It was the quickest one.
Yeah.
Usually I get it from, actually Racetronics is a sponsor of the show. Racetronics
Okay.
is great. They do all the AM fittings.
Uh-huh.
You know, one of my favorite things about working in the garage is the problem-solving aspect. In the last shot, you saw me try to size up the extended drain flanges. Well, what I figured out is the flanges I got were the wrong ones. So I thought, well, I'm dead in the water. And then yesterday, I thought, well, wait a second. I've got aluminum flanges. I've got another set of extended aluminum flanges. I'm now a master aluminum TIG welder. Why don't I try, at the very least, to cut the original flanges off, weld the longer tube on, and see if we can keep making this thing a go. So I've just spent the last hour prepping all the parts I need, which I'll show you in one sec, to make that happen. The second thing is, when Chris and I were trying to weld up the cylinders, we both had blowouts at the very, very end of the last run. So we welded up one side, it went fine. As we were on the very end of the second cap, they both blew out, like in the exact same way. We were wondering why that could be, and then we went, wait a second. This is a cylinder that I'm now welding to be completely sealed on the inside. There's so much heat happening from the welding that it pressurizes inside the pipe. So when you try to weld that last little bit, there's literally hot air spurting out of that hole. So can't do it that way. So here's what I'm going to do. I have just prepped all of this stuff that I need to combine into my two tanks. If I show you really close here, you see how that thing is all blown out at the end? This all looks relatively good. I mean, for me anyway, but this would not weld, and it didn't matter if I was doing it or if Chris, who's a master welder, was doing it. We both had the exact same issue. And that's because it would just get too pressurized inside when we sealed it. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna weld one end on. I've just spent all this time prepping all of this stuff, so it looks really good now. We're gonna weld one end on, and then I'm gonna figure out how the flanges need to go and get this thing drilled out. The reason I don't want to drill this hole first is because it would leave a very thin membrane here. And if I tried to weld this end on, there's a real chance that it would melt like a quarter inch of this pipe, which I obviously don't want to do. So I'm going to weld the caps on each one of them on one side. Then we're going to shoot over to the car and figure out how much length I'm going to need on this extension. And then I'm going to try my best to weld these extensions onto the original flanges, which are here. It's going to be a little tricky because it's going to run into that a little bit, which is going to be a little challenging, but we'll cross that bridge when we get there. At any rate, this doesn't even have to be like that sealed, you know what I mean? It just, the oil just needs to drain into that tube. So it's not the biggest deal in the world. I'm gonna weld these 2 caps on now with all my newfound amazing TIG welding skills. Fingers crossed, because it just took me well over an hour to prep all this stuff. And hopefully I get this thing on here, it looks okay, and then we'll shoot over to the car and do the thing I just said. A little tungsten touch, but I got it. Okay. 2 good tacks. Basically, I've got 2 on opposite sides. I'm going to put the 2 so I have, like, imagine 12, 3, 6, 9 on clock. So I basically just have like tack to work towards. Gravity is definitely helpful in this case because getting this stuff to flow when you're the other way around is a little weird. All right, we're tacked in all 4 spots on each one. So one of the things I learned the first time around is that heat soak is a big deal with aluminum. As it gets hotter and hotter, the weld wants to just penetrate deeper and deeper into the material. So the reason why like the first row of welds is so good is because the material is totally cold. And it's the same on each one of these. Like it just looks like a nice, easy weld. The hotter this thing gets, the more it digs into the aluminum. So I've just tried to cool these down. I could use my air compressor. I probably should. But basically, these things need to cool down. But it's why I did just 1/4 of a pass, 1/4 of a pass, and then I switched over to the other side and did the same thing. So I'll probably do exactly the same thing. I might even alternate, where I'm going to basically start over here and then weld up to this spot weld and try to make it look nice. And then I'll do the same thing on this one, and I'll go back and forth until this thing is closed up. And hopefully the welds stay somewhat the same size. I'm pretty happy with them right now. All right, guys, here we are. I threw a little polish on them. And I'm really happy with how they turned out with my rudimentary welding skills. I got a few, dime stacks in there. They're not super consistent, but it's 4 different quarters, and that's okay. I don't mind. But now at least we have something to go by. I think they're going to look fine. And now I will size up how long the tube needs to be to actually work with these. Cut the tubes, cut the hole, and try to weld around the hole. Okay. Tweaked and tacked. So this is the one, and then that one is just... go. Nice fit. Okay, after a brief lunch break and a break to watch Lando win in Miami, I kind of left this like this. This is basically effectively the tube that would be in here and what I would have to do to weld the tube up. The problem is I'm right up against the capability of my welding. So this is just practice, by the way. I don't want to ruin a good one like this. So I'm going to actually switch to a smaller tungsten here and see if I can actually weld this thing. If I can't, then what I'll do with the permanent ones is I'll probably just tack them, and then I'll give them to Chris or somebody who knows what they're doing to fully finish the weld, because I don't want to mess it up at this point. All this hard work to prep everything and get it all together, I don't want to just kind of blow it because I'm up against my capabilities as a TIG welder. So, going to switch out the tungsten to a 1/16 and see if that helps. Maybe even do a smaller lens here. This is an 8. I might try a 7. And I'm going to give this thing another go and see if I can just put like a halfway decent bead around here. If I can, then I may continue on. If I can't, then I will probably reset and tack and let somebody who knows what they're doing finish thing off. So as I suspected, I don't know enough about how to set my welder up to make this tube install look really clean. So I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to weld the other end cap on to both of these tanks. I'm going to get the tube set and hopefully tacked in a couple of spots. And then I'm going to leave it for somebody who knows what they're doing, because it's a pretty public looking weld. It's kind of right out there if you look at the turbos. I'm comfortable enough with, so far, my end cap welding. And you go, okay, this guy's not a pro, but at least it's not like the worst thing I've ever seen. Not comfortable at all with the tube into pipe welding, which really does look as awful as anything I've ever done. Partially because it's very small and tight. If these were larger tubes having to fit together, you're kind of welding on a straight line anyway, and you can just kind of do it like this. But this is so narrow and tight, I just don't have the skill to do it the way it's supposed to be done. So I don't want to ruin these because there's so much work to get to this point. So these things definitely need to cool down a little bit. I definitely felt the aluminum starting to give because the heat got too high. And you can even tell I'm starting to undercut the end cap a little bit because of the heat. I've got 2 more passes to do on each one, and then the end caps will be officially sewn on. Well, here we are. This is a major milestone in this project. I gotta say, I'm really happy with how these have turned out so far. The welds are like, there's a couple of welds in here that you go, this guy actually looks like he knows what he's doing. I didn't undercut too much. This one right here, I had a little chunk I took out, but otherwise it's pretty round. Each one of them really came out nice and round without cutting into the top too much. The welds are mostly consistent. Like, I'm not embarrassed if I have to show somebody, oh yeah, I made these little tanks. So that's cool. Maybe in the interim between when you see me next time, I will practice and see how it goes. But so far I haven't been able to figure out how to set the welder up to get these tight little welds necessary to get into these small spaces. All right, so I've rigged up this kind of jig. I used the flanges from the other turbos to bolt this thing on, and that way I get complete symmetry from each side, and hopefully everything is square. That's the idea anyway. So I couldn't get anything to puddle that time. I don't know why. I think maybe because this tube is really thick. So I'm actually going to crank up the amps a little bit. Crank up 10 amps and see if I can get this thing to actually puddle, because it just wasn't doing it. Yeah. There might also be a breeze. I'm going to shut the door. Come on, baby, give me a puddle. I can't get a puddle here. Look at it.
Look it up, puddle.
Come on, puddle. Come on, baby. Give me a friggin' puddle. Shit. That was annoying as shit. Give me my puddle. Let me get my tack here. Definitely not pretty. It just seems like it's so contaminated. Oh, wow. This totally friggin' moved, too. Well, here's this. I could not get this thing to play ball. Like, it just wouldn't tack at all. So I'm going to leave it. I don't want to ruin all of my work up until this point, so I'm going to leave these tacked the way they are. I'm going to let them cool down naturally, and then when I'm in touch with Chris again, I'll see if he doesn't mind just welding these things up so they stay where they are. But for now, this is really good. I think in the next video, I'll be able to work on the routing, where the oil scavenge pump is going to need to go, and then where these drain plugs will go on the backside. Well, guys, that is going to be it for this one. Huge special thanks to Chris from Cruise Infinity Fab for helping me, showing me the basics of how to TIG weld aluminum, getting my machine set up. I'm going to leave the hard stuff for him, which should be in an upcoming video, or maybe I'll just have him take it back to his shop and do it because he's got all of his own equipment there. Next video, I'm going to bolt these things up and figure out where the routing of all the hoses is going to be, as well as where I'm going to be mounting my wastegates and the pipes that go underneath the main exhaust. Until then, we will see you next time. Thanks so much for hanging out and subscribing. Keep on rocking.